In a quiet town surrounded by green fields and dusty roads lived a boy named Aram. He was known among his classmates, but not for the right reasons. Aram had a slight limp in his walk because of a childhood injury, and he also struggled to speak confidently in front of others. Whenever he tried to answer questions in class, his voice trembled, and sometimes words would get stuck in his throat. Because of this, many students laughed at him. Some would imitate his walk, while others mocked his hesitant speech. Over time, Aram stopped raising his hand in class. He stopped volunteering for activities. He began sitting in the last row, hoping no one would notice him. Inside, however, Aram was full of dreams. He loved observing the world. He noticed the way sunlight fell on leaves, the expressions on people's faces, the patterns in clouds. But he never shared these thoughts with anyone. He believed that someone with flaws like his had no place in the spotlight. Every afternoon, he would return home quietly. His mother often asked, "How was your day?" And he would simply reply, "It was fine, even when it wasn't." At night, he would write in his notebook, not homework, but feelings. He wrote about loneliness, about wanting to be accepted, about wishing he could be like everyone else. One evening, while cleaning the house, his mother found the notebook accidentally. She read a few lines, and her eyes filled with tears. She didn't mention it immediately, but she understood that her son was carrying a heavy emotional burden. The next day, she called him to the backyard. There were two plants placed side by side. One was tall and perfectly straight, growing in a new shiny pot. The other was smaller, slightly bent, growing in an old cracked pot. "Which plant do you think will grow better?" she asked. Aram pointed to the straight one. "This one. It looks perfect." His mother smiled gently. "Look closely." Aram noticed that the plant in the cracked pot had small buds forming, while the perfect plant looked dry. His mother explained, "This cracked pot lets a little water leak into the soil every day. The extra moisture helps the roots spread. The perfect pot holds water inside, but sometimes the roots don't grow strong." Aram stayed silent. His mother continued, "Life is similar. What we think are flaws sometimes help us grow in ways others can't." That conversation stayed with him. For the first time, he wondered if his differences might hold meaning. A few days later, the school announced a storytelling competition. Students had to write and present an original story. Aram loved writing, but the idea of speaking on stage terrified him. He almost ignored the announcement, but that night, he remembered his mother's words. Slowly, he picked up his notebook and began writing. He wrote about a broken bridge that people avoided, but which eventually became the only path that saved a village during a flood. The story symbolized how imperfections can become strengths. For a week, he practiced reading it aloud in his room. At first, his voice shook badly. Sometimes he stopped midway, frustrated, but he didn't quit. Every day, he improved a little. His mother quietly listened from outside the door, encouraging him with small smiles. The day of the competition arrived. The school auditorium was full. Students whispered, laughed, and waited for their turns. When Aram's name was called, his heart started pounding. His hands felt cold. For a moment, he considered walking away. But then he looked at the audience and spotted his mother sitting at the back. She nodded slightly, giving him silent courage. Aram stepped onto the stage. He adjusted the microphone. For a few seconds, no sound came out. Some students giggled. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began. "My story is about a broken bridge." His voice trembled at first, but as he continued, he became more immersed in the story. He forgot about the laughter. He focused on the message. His words, though not perfectly fluent, were filled with honesty. The hall slowly grew silent. Teachers leaned forward. Students who once mocked him listened carefully. By the time he finished, there was a pause, and then loud applause filled the room. Aram stood still, surprised. He had never experienced such appreciation before. His eyes became moist. When the results were announced, Aram didn't win first place. He came second. But something more valuable had happened. His classmates approached him, not to laugh, but to say, "Your story was powerful." One boy who had often mocked him said, quietly, "I didn't know you could write like that." Aram smiled for the first time without hesitation. From that day onward, he didn't become perfect. He still limped. His voice still shook sometimes. But he stopped seeing these as failures. Instead, he focused on improving his strengths. He joined a school writing club. He began helping others with essays. Gradually, he even became more confident in speaking. Years later, Aram grew up to become a motivational writer. He shared stories about self-worth and courage. In one of his speeches, he said, "I used to believe my flaws would hold me back forever, but I learned that flaws don't define failure. They shape resilience. They teach patience. They build empathy. And sometimes they lead you to your true purpose." The audience gave him a standing ovation. Aram looked around and realized something important. He had not become successful despite his flaws, but because of them.